You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, I got my partner in crime, the Occult Reject mad scientist Liza, with me, co-hosting as usual. Thank you very much for jumping on, Liza. I appreciate it. And I know we're both very much looking forward to having this return guest. We had him on probably about a month ago. The episode dropped a few weeks ago. And we got him back on again. We have Carl Abrahamsson. Sorry, I always screw up that last name. And we got him back on. I thought if you didn't see the last episode, I highly, highly suggest to please go back and check it out. We talked about a lot of deep stuff, a lot of cool things. This man had a very interesting life and got to meet a lot of interesting people. And he has a lot of stuff to share. So please go check out that episode. And when you're done listening to that one, come back to this one and then listen to this. All right. So, Liza, real quick, would you like to let everybody know what your deal is and where they can get in contact with you if they want to?
Sure. Twitter, Solis Liza, and Instagram, Lisa Solis.
Awesome.
And if you would like to also check out some of our other collaborators that contribute enormously brilliant work, I think, to the occultresearchinstitute.org. Please check us out there as well.
Yes, I always forget about our website. Yes, thank you very much. And finally, back to Carl. Carl, let everybody know, in case people, I know I have new listeners, let people know what your deal is and like who you are, if you don't mind.
Yeah, my deal is that I am from Sweden, and where to begin? It's just like I've had a very interesting life, and a lot of people can say that, of course, but I have had the good fortune to recently not only write but also have my kind of memoir published, which is called Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, Life in the Occult Underground, because that's basically been my deal. I have always been interested in, infatuated with, enamored with, and also occupied within occultism or occulture, this strange kind of intersection between the creative arts and magical practice. And that's something that I've been working with since the mid 1980s, and I've always written about it. So I've been kind of a what you can call a meta magician, being a practicing magician, but also writing about it, my own process, and also historically and how it touches upon culture. And that's just been, a wild roller coaster ride. And I've had some beautiful fellow passengers that brought me onto the train in a way, or the roller coaster early on. I would say mainly perhaps Genesis Peorage, Anton LaVey, and also Kenneth Anger, and then, many others also. But those are probably the most famous ones. Like I said, the book came out fairly recently, and it's been very weird, but mostly in a very good way, because writing the book was, of course, that's like real analytical work. I have to go through diaries. I have to go through, photographic negatives and correspondence and archives. And it's not always fun, because you realize things that, I was so depressed at this time. But mostly it's been good, and you remember things that that I had forgotten, especially through the diaries. I say, like who I met at this on this journey and what we talked about, stuff that I couldn't cogitate in my memory, but I found a lot of stuff, and that made writing the book very, very pleasurable. And then also connecting the red dots or the red threads and the dots, and just seeing what the hell happened. And I'm still processing that now that the book is out. What the hell happened, and why did these beautiful, innovative magicians sort of take me under their wing in a way, metaphorically, and worked with me and taught me things. And I have now come to the point where I feel almost obliged or honor bound to carry on in the same kind of spirit. Now I have many strains go, so I'm not like denominational in any way. I have always been eclectic, open-minded, and maybe that's been an attractive feat or treat for other people. But I have started to really synthesize what I have been taught and what my life has brought me, and I feel honor bound to to pay respect, not only pay back to the people I've worked with, but also to pay forward and bring this kind of synthesis onward to a new generation or to a new scene or a new crowd. And I do believe that people will be interested in that. The book is sort of a little beacon to test the waters in a way, because it really sums up what I've experienced. And if people feel some kind of resonance with a part of that, then I'm sure they would be interested to hear about what I'm thinking about now and what I'll be writing about in the future. So, and then of course I've always been very multi-creative. That's not always a good thing. It can be, it's a bad career thing. If you work with music, you work with photography, you work with filmmaking, and of course writing also. But for me, it's been kind of pathological. I think these different creative expressions have been necessary to balance my mind, probably. I have a tendency to become very heady, very mental or intellectual in a way. So making music, for instance, has always been like a balm. It's been such a soothing affair to go into a sphere that is just all emotional and all aesthetic in a way too. And filmmaking, I think that's just another expression of my journalistic mind, because I've been mostly working with documentary film. But it's beautiful challenges that I've been very happy about working with these kinds of things. So that's a long story condensed in a very, very short form. That's my deal.
I love it. Thank you very much, Carl. And today, and I find this topic interesting. I'm not exactly sure where you'll go with it, but I know you did want to talk about the concept of dissemination of occult teachings in the high in this tech fragmented world. And, I thought it was interesting how you talked about you trying to write books and actually talk to people. And, sometimes I wonder about with all the tech we have now. I mean, with books, you can't really, once you have the book, unless you rip pages out, you can't really change it. Online and on the internet, you can go back and change things. You know what I'm saying? But once you kind of have that book, it can't be edited, it can't be changed. And I have wondered if there's something to that, or if we lost kind of that in a sense with computers and technology now. So that's my thought. That I just, going back to the original ways, even a newspaper gets sent to your house. Somebody can't come and, now censor what they sent you. It's already at your door. It's already been written, so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was just thoughts that I had.
I think the dilemma of let's call it dissemination of teachings or thoughts or ideas is that there are simply so many ways to do it. There's so many options, and that of course has to do with technology. And I think in essence, nothing is good or bad. It's just different approaches for different people. When you talk about a young generation of kids, they seem almost immediately or at a very young age completely tech savvy. Is that something in the water or the air, or is it just the general culture? Well, of course it's the culture. They are exposed to the technology and they see that their peers, whether they're also 5 years old or their parents, all use technology. So that's part of their survival mechanism, is to get into that as soon as possible. And then of course, hopefully there will be good, as it's called, programming coming through that particular technology. And I remember very well the internet arrived, and then of course it didn't take long before there was this thing called ebooks, and that was oh no, it's horrible, it's going to kill books, it's going to kill literature, and all of these things that always come when there are great technological developments. But on the other hand, we can safely say that, you know, the ebook market is just part of the book market. And then slightly later came the audiobooks, and it's the same thing. People sit in their cars, they're bored, you know, people commute, people are on the way somewhere, and it's great to be able to listen to a book. You know, what's the problem? I personally have no problem. I find reading a book is incredibly important for me because I'm used to it. But I wouldn't sort of disrespect someone who's been brought up on listening to audiobooks or reading books on their tablets. It's just different media. But the main thing is there is something there that wants to enter someone else's mind, or we should probably say that there is a mind there that wants ideas to come via this platform, whether it's fiction or fact or scientific material, whatever. So I think that it's incredibly fascinating. It is in a way like with entertainment. There are so many platforms, and what I can see clearly there is that the dissemination or the presentation of material, in case, for instance, a love story, right? You would have gone to the cinema and watched like a romantic comedy, you know, condensed in 90 funny, beautiful minutes. But now, and it goes for all genres, of course, but now sort of we are knocked out on the couch and realize, whoa, where did these 10 hours go? I just watched an entire season of this series that basically contains the same story of these people meeting and conflicts and intrigues. The same with horror or Westerns, whatever. It's like a protraction. It's so, everything is extended. And I think that's essentially quite bad. It's narcotic. It doesn't get you more of, you know, if you watch a really good movie, 90 minutes, that can take you to a different place temporarily, make you feel good escapistically, and then you come out of the cinema and you go, wow, that's a great film. Actually, it was a magical film because it made me transcend my normal mind frame. But when you're on the couch, I should speak for myself now, when I'm on the couch, I feel mostly sedated. You know, it can be great images and great stories coming at you, but it's way too long. You know, it steals away like 10, 12 hours of my life, again, with the same kind of story that could have been condensed in 90 minutes. But yes. I'm not kind of a Luddite or anything. For instance, a thick book of 1,000 pages is not worse than a book that's 150 pages. It all depends what it contains. But anyway, you know, ebooks are fine, audiobooks are great. Also, what we're doing now is fantastic. You can be over there, I can be over here, we can talk, and people can then also listen to it and hopefully be, you know, interested in it and perhaps even inspired by it. And I think that what's missing here, though, is the real human dynamic of being in the same space, because we are not in the same space. We can interpret facial expressions and vocal timbres and that kind of stuff. But when you're in the same space as another human being or more, there are other energies at work. And in my case, to return to this kind of dissemination that I was exposed to, most of the substantial magical stuff or wisdom or energies came in between the lines. You know, I might have been at Anton LaVey's Black House, where loved to watch movies. He was a great curator of culture, presenting certain movies or played certain music. That was wonderful and funny. At the same time, you know, it was there with Anton LaVey and, you know, the founder of the Church of Satan, who'd written so many books about, you know, satanic philosophy and wisdom and also magic. But we never really talked about, yeah, then you do this and then you invoke that and then da-da-da-da. Like on a technical level, the information, so-called, or the wisdom came in between the lines. Could be little winks of the eye or innuendos, or the way he performed music in his little synthesizer park in his kitchen. And it all made sense eventually. It's like things were dropped into my mind, again, like tossing dots that I had to connect in a way. And that was true for Genesis also, in that we worked a lot on different creative projects, meaning we didn't just sit around and talk about magic or did magical rituals. To some degree, we did that too, but it was mostly about which project is next. And the project contains the philosophy, the project contains the actual work that creates a change in the outer world. And that was very, very epiphanic, filled with insights that I would never have had we only talked about technical magical stuff. And anger is another good example where he created something that is also heavily integrated in the LaVeyan system, this thing with a total environment. When I first visited him in Hollywood in 1990, I went to his place and it was like beautiful Art Deco museum of old Hollywood history, because he was also, of course, the author of the Hollywood Babylon books. And he really knew his Hollywood history, and preferably the dark side of it. But to be in that environment where there was like not even sunlight coming in, it was like completely hermetic. That taught me a lot about space and time. He preferred to be in that old 1930s time, and there was nothing in his space that evoked anything modern. It was just like a shrine to not only to Rudolph Valentino and Clara Bow and all these movie stars, but also to, Crowley was very present also through beautiful first editions of his books. So basically, you curate your own space-time. And that's not something that we talked about. So now you do this and now you do that. It was something that I was exposed to, and the real communication came in between the lines. And much later, we also did things together. I sat as a kind of a moderator or an interviewer when Anger was doing things at film schools, for instance, because I knew his work so well. And that was the same thing there. He might have talked factually about what he wanted to do with that film or how that film was produced. But at the same time, there was a dynamic there in between us, because we both knew these things, so we could have a kind of a meta level in a way, or a different kind of communication that was not necessarily verbal all the time. It was more of a energy flows and little innuendos and winks and things that are great. Like glue, like the bond people on a friendship level. But since we were both so heavily interested in magic, that was very much part of that package. And I remember so well something that I write about in the book also, that when I came to Anger's house for the first time, and that the first visit, he actually lent me really rare books from his library, even though I was going back to Sweden with those books, but he had no problem lending me them, because he could probably scan me and see that, well, he's a decent person, or he has some magical potential, whatever. But I felt so incredibly honored by that also, and of course eventually returned the books in pristine shape. But just those kinds of things where you are entrusted, that's very important. Being entrusted is also becoming empowered in a way in that particular dynamic, with whether it's one magician or the group that is around him or her. And I found it so so many times that it's not about this sort of distinct, clear communication, 10 easy steps. On the contrary, the more emotional and irrational in a way, transcendental, proto-human, the better you can convey ideas on empowerment that has magical application potential.
That you bring up a very interesting concept, what's in between. And to me, it seems like just relationships in general, whether it is love, friendship, or anything like that, exists within the space between words, between actions, between, and that is the measurement of actual depth, so to speak. And totally. I think even if you distill it down to when you're by yourself, you know, between being in the presence of someone else and then being by yourself and then being in the presence of someone else again, that is a moment of maybe self-discovery that you can take away from an interaction. You're alone with yourself, and then you're with someone else, and then you kind of, you know, use that time to understand yourself. But when you are with someone, you have these silent moments, or you have, like you said, these nonverbal moments, and it is within those moments that it's almost condensed, that you come to the self, or the, instead of self-realization, the realization of the relationship, so to speak. That's it's for some reason that came to mind when you were saying that.
Yeah, and that brings a beautiful, well, it's not only a symbol, it's a reality also. When you said that, I thought of rhythm. You know, rhythm is the foundation of most musics, but a rhythm isn't only the beats, it's also the silence in between. You know, it's what's called a syncopation, and that's the thing that makes you, you know, want to dance. It's not the sort of the frantic beats, but also the silence in between. And I think that also, here we come to another very, very crucial concept in magic, which is what I call this, you know, source magic, that we all come from a shamanistic or a shamanic heritage. And that, of course, is the transcendental experience. And in a way, the space in between the rhythm beats is the transcendental experience. And when you don't use your rational brain or mind to communicate, there's communication going on all the time, in between the lines or in between the beats. Basically a transcendental experiences. And if we take it more literally, of course, the transcendental experiences, you know, regardless of how you achieve them, it could be illicit or you know, completely legal, sexual, exhaustion, whatever, you know, those are moments where you do get epiphanic insights about yourself. And quite often, it's not like all isolated experiences. It's very often together with other people. And for instance, if we stick with the rational for a little bit, when we are in conversation, the dynamic between the two, or possibly more, create insights that could not come from solitary cogitation. You know, we can try, you as a scientist know well that, you know, you can try to cogitate certain things, but you come to a dead end, and, you know, you just can't, you know, push it anymore, because we have to, as they say, think outside the box. And I think one of the best ways to do that, regardless if it's science or art, or, you know, politics, whatever, is simply to communicate with other people and see where that, you know, where that takes all of the people involved. And usually new things come up in that kind of focused conversation. And that leads to something that I believe will be crucial for me. I'm not saying it's the best route for all people who want to disseminate some kind of teaching, but I have had very good experiences of being, for instance, in psychoanalysis. And I liked it so much, it was so good for me, that eventually I got married to a psychoanalyst. So now I have my own in-house. Although she wouldn't agree to that. But anyway, that kind of direct communication where you talk and talk and talk, and sometimes in psychoanalysis it's not so much talking back, but I do believe in a very deep conversation or a dialogue. So it's not just a one track, a one-sided, a one-directional dissemination, but it's built upon very much question, answer, answer, question, question, answer, that it becomes more of a real human dialogue, or possibly with more people also. That creates things. For that simple reason, there will be transcendences or transcendental moments that would never appear if I were, for instance, only to read from my book or hold some kind of, present a paper as in an academic context. So that's something that I'm thinking very much about, how to synthesize what I have experienced, and then how to do it in the best possible way.
You think the book and in video stuff is probably the best way, you think?
Yeah, I think so. To really reach out, of course, that's now traditional media, specifically with books. You write about something, you send it out, but it's still not that dialogue, right? The reader reads, the author writes. But it's a beautiful thing. And then, of course, you have could be like video lectures. That's just extensions of the same dynamic. However, we just came back from a conference in Copenhagen, and it was quite interesting because neither me nor my wife were really academics. Of course, I've been to university, but I never pursued an academic career. Always wanted to be sort of on the outside. But now we were invited to an academic conference, which was essentially about this fairly new field called the study of Western esotericism. That's the umbrella. And under that umbrella, of course, you can go in many different routes. And the reason why I think I was invited was that I've been such a vocal force when it comes to occulture, the merger between occult and culture. And I presented a paper on a beautiful film by John Frankenheimer from 1966 called Seconds. And if you haven't seen that film, I strongly recommend it. It's very magical, very prescient, very scary in a way, about someone who wants to change his identity because he feels inert, And I'm not going to spoil it, but I can say that it doesn't end well. Because when it becomes too much of an arbitrary decision and too much of a quick fix, that's the problem. Then things go sour. And strangely enough, when we were in Copenhagen at this thing, we had the chance to see a new American film called The Substance, another film I strongly recommend with Demi Moore. And it's fantastic, The Substance. And I realized, wow, this is basically the same film as this film I was talking about, Seconds. But it's contemporary, and it's about from the female perspective. What happens when you grow old and you're a media person and a celebrity, what happens in your mind. And it's a horrifying film. It's a really scary horror film. But it's interesting how these themes seem to pop up once in a while. And they seem to be doing it in clusters, meaning that there are films around the same theme that come up. You could call it trends, I guess. But all trends come from somewhere. And I think I talked about that last time. I'm a big fan of Jung's collective unconscious. So I think that whatever comes up for a reason. And the reason right now should probably be survival of the species, perhaps. But anyway, the delivery or the presentation of this paper within this academic context is very interesting because, as you know, they have rules. There are 3 parallel panels. You can only present for 20 minutes and allow for 10 minutes to go for a little bit of Q&A, and there's the responsible academic shows his hand or her hand, 5 minutes left, or then 2 minutes left, and it's like sports in a way, intellectual sports. And it's not my cup of tea, but I greatly enjoy being invited now and then, because it's a challenge also for me to condense my presentation. But still, there is this thing, what should be a great time and space for learning and communication and sharing of information instead become this fact that they have 3 parallel panels reminds me of this concept of speed dating, where you go from table to table and you're supposed to present whatever is good with you and what you're looking for in 1 minute. And then if nothing happens, nothing happens. But how could it? So I think that, yeah, I think that what needs to happen is a real time, a real space, and where people are not only open to transmit, but people should, of course, be open to receive. So that it's a completely consensual experience, that also you trust the person who you feel has something to say of value to you. Of course, you can never know until it takes place, but you can, of course, use your intuitive human knowledge meter and say, this person seems very high strung, filled with himself, angry or frustrated, something feels off. Then that will affect how you receive whatever transmissions are coming from that person. Whereas, the classical kind of Eastern guru figure, we project in our prejudiced minds that, they're so, enlightened, and I will listen to them because they're so serene and peaceful. But behind that facade can also be, a garage filled with 20 Rolls Royces. There's always some inherently human thing going on. But the best barometer, or the best bullshit detector, should always be yourself and what you immediately feel. Whether it's like American 10 Easy Steps, quick fixes, or the Eastern guru type. If one doesn't feel right, then don't go there. But if one does feel right, then go there. So I think that's also the challenge when you feel you have something to disseminate, is to show your true face in a way, show your real you. And I think that's something that I'm thinking about also, because I've tried to be as honest as possible in writing the book. I'm being kind of kind. I could have been meaner or bitchier in a way, but it's not that kind of book. I've had bad experiences too with people, but that would be, I don't find it worthy in a way to write that kind of book, because for me, very much the book is about, again, bringing it forward, paying it forward, and presenting whatever it is that I've been taught to a new generation or a new crowd. And by being entertaining, can, I think, decimate the strength of the signal in that way.
I think podcasting and writing, just writing in general, anything you want to write about, I think that potentially, well, now podcasting, because it's a new form of media, is some of the vestiges to where you have that freedom, to where you don't have the rigor, you don't have the, you have to adhere to this, you have to do it like that, and what have you, and you can flow the communication in a way to where the person receiving is voluntarily receiving, right? Because he chooses to buy the book, or he chooses to press play on the podcast. And the person giving, they are not adhering to any, unless you're, I guess, NPR or something, I don't know. But they're not adhering to some criteria that you're like, I have to write these things this way, or I have to say these this way. I do feel like that might still have a little bit of the vestige for the freestyle that that you're mentioning right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it is pretty amazing. I wish I had more of myself, more copies of myself, because there's simply so much to explore and also to work with. And again, all of these things take a lot of time. Just marketing on social media every day is like, wow, I spent 2 hours doing that. Whereas in fact, I could have worked on creative writing or something else. But it's just part of the game now. It's just part of the way it works. But it is fascinating. I did try to, for a while, kept up with whatever I wrote or whatever lecture or essay I had written. I also recorded myself on video, like a video lecture. And that, it's very cool. I like it very much. But again, that also takes time. And then I now have Substack where I have those clips. They're also still on YouTube, like the Occult lectures, and it's such a great platform. And I think the reason why I like it is that I don't feel I have to compete, meaning there's no inherent monetization in that. If there were, I would probably be more nervous or anxious, or maybe doing a better job at it. But I do believe that the fact that it's possible is beautiful. It's really, really good. And also, I feel so dazed with all the availability of content in general, whether it's fiction or other people's creative writing about occultism, that I hardly go into the sphere, the sphere of actually looking for things on the internet. The few times I do, I tend to find considerably more good and interesting stuff than trash, because we have somehow developed or mutated our minds that we do away with the trash much quicker. That's a dilemma for kids, because anything that blinks and is attractive, they will go for, and that can be, dangerous, but also kind of pacifying. But I find that, with a little bit of direction, you can find a lot of great stuff. And that goes for, of course, information finding in other ways, like, available libraries online, old material that back in the day would have been almost impossible to acquire, be remote lending from a library in another country, or antiquarian book dealers where the price tag was like, insane. Now it's basically all available. And I think that it confused the occult scene in a little way, because what has happened, say, this past decade or 2 decades, is this return to a bibliophile kind of mind, where small publishers they produce such beautiful occult books, whether historical or contemporary, whatever. So they go into this bibliophile mind frame with, I guess, the idea that beautiful thoughts need to be preserved in a good way. And I think Crowley was probably the best example of how that worked, because he, inherited some money, he traveled the world, had a great time, and, a lot of it went to heroin also, but he did self-publish a lot of his books in very beautiful editions. And that's the reason why he could live on, because he had very few followers when he died. He was, destitute and fairly decrepit, but there were enough books left, physical objects, in the hands of people who really loved them, and that, became a little snowball who kept rolling down the hill. And today it's a huge market. And now that Crowley has gone out of he has gone into the public domain, because he's been dead long enough. Now there's simply so much Crowley out there, and that all started with producing beautiful books. So I think these publishers today are thinking in the same way, that whatever it is that is written and produced, they want it to be preserved. But I think also, as a kind of a devil's advocate perspective, that what is it really that matters? Is it the quality of the binding? Is it the price tag? Is it the beauty of the object? Or is it possibly the idea of the author? And cannot that idea of the author be disseminated equally well in an ebook for $1.99 on Amazon? I wonder. Actually, I do know the answer to that, but that answer is only mine. I have also had those kind of publishing businesses where we have made beautiful, beautiful books, and they are beautiful still, but the ideas in them aren't different when presented in an ebook. So the thing is, what are you after? Are you after the glamour of occultism? Then you need a lot of money to buy these expensive books. Or are you after fodder, real, practically implementable fodder for you as a magician? Then you can find it for free. And that, again, is like It's a matter of how you disseminate and who is the audience. Because some of the snobbish people who only buy books they can't afford are not really susceptible for information coming from the free. It's weird, but it seems to be the case.
I like how you said that, because I've even experienced that myself in the occult community, buying these expensive books. I know you had.
Yeah. And
Go ahead.
No. I think it's just, in a way, it's beautiful and charming and endearing, but it's also kind of crazy, because it tends to go overboard. It becomes almost parodic, and people tend to forget what's actually in the book because the object itself takes over. So, and that can be, I think, fairly counterproductive.
That, this may sound like a weird way to tie them together, but I could almost see that with like what you were kind of saying about like maybe initiations and the degrees before. It's like, just because I have obtained like, this object or this thing, that automatically means that like I know. I don't know. It's just, I think sometimes people put too much weight into like an object or an attainment, and not looking at like what's really supposed to be going on. I don't know how to explain it any better. But.
Exactly, it's symbolic. It's the difference between the symbolic and the real. The initiation is a symbolic journey. At least if we talk about it from the point of view of, the Freemasonic structure that is so dominant, of course, within Freemasonry, but also in other groups that sort of mimic or emulate a Freemasonic structure. And the candidate goes on a journey and learns these gradual things, and it's usually from the bottom up, like a ladder going upwards, and then they come to that pinnacle, and mostly they receive some certificate or a funny hat or something, but that doesn't mean anything in itself, right? There are people who have been shook to the core in trauma, or the sadness when someone they love has died. Those are the things that really break open the head and allow for new things to emerge within perhaps an inert or too routine infested existence. We need to be shaken up. And again, the transcendental experience again. Transcendental experiences can come from good and pleasurable stuff, can also come from trauma. And I'm not saying that's something to pursue, but life happens. And when we go on these symbolic journeys, eventually, hopefully, you will come out of that having actually learned something. I have been through one, possibly two of those experiences, but the value of it was not the experiences per se. It was the deeper kind of interaction with real live people, having also gone through these things. So again, it's this kind of a social unlocking of insights. And of course, they wouldn't come in that way if I hadn't gone through those initiations in that kind of structure, or maybe I had received them in some different way. But what I think I'm after here in terms of the symbolic versus the real is that something that I usually recommend to people who ask me about these things is to go on actual pilgrimages themselves. I mean, physical. It could be long trips, it could be short trips, but just concoct something that is meaningful. And now we're at Halloween, All Saints Day, still celebrated here in Sweden, where you light candles at the cemeteries, stuff like that. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing to do, to honor the ancestors. This is essentially a very human, but it's also a very pagan thing to do. And in Sweden, it's quite remarkable because the cemeteries are all Christian and stuff, but it's just something to. Yeah, there's such serenity there that completely transcends the religion itself. It's just a respect for the dead in a way. And I think to go on that kind of pilgrimage to, where your actual ancestors are buried and pay your respects, that's a beautiful thing. Or if you're attracted to, you have a favorite band and the lead singer comes from some town in the Midwest, you go there, not necessarily to meet that person, but just because it has meant so much for you or it could be something religious, could be something magical, but just actually to do it, those things will most likely teach you more about life and yourself than going through an initiatic symbolic structure, eventually, promising to deliver some, highfalutin secret. That's something I would recommend, to bring magic not down, but to bring magic into the actual human existence, and let it merge with that, and not let it be too abstracted, too an intellectual pursuit, in which it becomes like either a social club or I don't know if I can say this, like a dick measuring contest.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of that.
No,
in the
I
community.
said it. So this thing where you completely lose the original impetus, which should be self-refinement, self-empowerment, or possibly empowerment by someone else too. That's a beautiful thing. But essentially, a gradual progression, or in an alchemically symbolic way, go from lead to gold, to have that refinement process. And I think that even if you are within an environment and feel comfortable, you have to at some point leave that environment and go on your own path. I think that's just general, universal, magical wisdom, that you have to break free from, even from the benevolent fetters. And that could be of parents or initiatory organizations or religions you're in. And that doesn't mean that you have to cut all ties for the rest of your life, but you have to go on these journeys. And I think Jung, I respect very much. Joseph Campbell, I respect very much. Campbell came up with this, the monomythic journey, the hero's journey, where you have to, just like all the fictional characters, have to feel the calling from the outside, then go on an adventure and be initiated by real life experiences, and then come back and, hopefully be a wiser person. And I think that for me rings more of real magic than, looking through a dusty old arcane tome from the medieval times about how to possibly conjure up a demon, evoke a demon to visible appearance, because why? Why would you do that when you can, go on foot or go in your car, go wherever and see the world, or an airplane, or just, do whatever and go for where the intuition takes you. Meaning we all have attractions to, magical things, and the more we work with them, the better. And I think most people will find out that they come from some kind of ancestral connection. The classical grandmother thing, who was not a stern authority in the sense of being a parent, but could just be generous with stuff, generous with stories, generous with candy, all kinds of things. And also the people who were usually not so rigid in terms of the education. I think most people can recognize that somehow, and perhaps even also have an actual magical heritage of someone being a witch, or someone being a Freemason or an alchemist, whatever. Magic is totally all around us. And the more you scrape the surface of, random people you meet, the more you'll find of this kind of inherent magical presence. And I think that has to do, again, with what I've talked about in the concept of source magic. We are all coming from the same source. And that was in the cave when we were trying to survive together by listening to what the shaman experienced on his or her crazy trips. And that helped us survive, not just fighting the animals or the other tribes, but also making fast deductions, intuitive deductions on how to manage this incredibly violent and strange, chaotic world. And it's really no different now. And that's why I think there is so much magic present in contemporary times in fiction. For instance, in culture in general. And I think it is to signal that we need to become more aware of this, that it actually means something to us. And I think most churches, most religions know it very well because they also work in the same tradition. They're just trying to hog it, to put a copyright thing on it saying only we can tell you what this is. But that's not the case. It's universal. And it should be universal, especially at times like this.
And I think rituals or performing them is almost like a walking the razor's edge, in that because we are bound to this type of processes within our brain psychologically, I think rituals are important to bring to the forefront of our brain, our emotional state, and our physical state. We're crossing a threshold. We are now transformative in this, we're building up to the transformation of this. And that is, I think, what the rituals or rituals stand for. However, I do see exactly what you're saying, that people will adhere and worship the ritual itself. When the ritual is the process, you don't worship the process, you worship the actual, or you don't worship anything. You're free of it. You're basically getting to a destination. You don't worship the car. You just are using it as a tool.
Exactly. Yeah.
But so that what you just said crystallized in my head with the ritual itself, and how we are bound to an extent to use rituals. But then I think once you reach that transformative state, you no longer need the ritual. You no longer need the robes, the this and that. You have evolved to now be able to do other things to where you can leave that behind. I don't know if that even makes any sense, but
yeah, I think so. And I think it's important for our mental health to work with the symbolic, because we cannot simply be rational cogitators all along. Like even in, management theory and, high business and stuff like that, over the decades, more and more has seeped in of, again, breaking open the mind or the head, whatever you want to call it. There are mind maps and there are mood boards and all these things that, 30 years ago would probably been regarded as complete hocus pocus, but it's now integrated. And, you have corporate shamans and corporate, coaches, life coaches. It's a thing. And I think it can become a thing on that mainstream level because only when there's a need for it. And I think that's great that happens because it's magic on a different level. But I think for the young individual who feels inclined to, or just attracted to the hocus pocus, I think that signals that there is such a need in individuals to work with the symbolic, to develop or hone your own intuition, not to, just clamp down on it and say, this is just bullshit or this means nothing. Because the reason why we're attracted to certain things is exactly because they mean something to us, and if you say no to that, you basically cut off a very important part of your potential development, and you become inert. That's, it's a harsh way of looking at it, but there are degrees, of course. But I think that's also part of this general, what I call occulturation. Things are moving from the occult into the mainstream because there is a need for it. 20 years ago, a big publishing company like Taschen produced so many art books, so many beautiful books. Now they have this Esoterica series. I think there's now 6 or 7 volumes that are so definitive. They make definitive books, and that wouldn't happen unless there was a market for it, right? But it's one about tarot, astrology, witchcraft. It's just amazing. It's like a wet dream of an older magician who grew up like 40, 50 years ago. They could never foresee it, but they hoped for it. And I think this is happening now again, simply because we need it in order to survive, actually. And that, I think, is also why I feel so preoccupied with this dissemination thing, because I feel that once you've been touched in a way, or experienced something, there is a dangerous tendency you can become a missionary, right? But I felt short-circuited early on, which was great, because it wasn't only Anton LaVey and his Satanism, nor Kenneth Anger and his Crowleyan Thelema, or Genesis Peorage and this kind of chaotic punkish energy. I have all of these things and then some, so I can't sell one of them. I could, but it would backfire in my own mind. So I have some kind of weird cluster of different spirits in a way that I now have to juggle and feel that I have to present it, but not in any kind of hear ye, come and listen here, and eventually you will get a funny hat. But for me, it's much more direct. I want to give people not only inspiration, but something to work with. And I think that's the outcome for me right now of having the book actually published now, is that where do I go with this? And I think I know. I have more book projects up ahead, and I'm talking to you and want to do more podcasts and more lectures, all kinds of things. And of course, it's all happening. So I'm very, very happy. And I think also I'm going to develop something more like a one-on-one thing. I'm calling it Source Magic Mentorship. Mostly for people who are already interested in magic or active, that can get some kind of guidance from someone who's worked it for, many, many decades. Because that's something that is either too mythologized, the master will appear when the student is ready. It's immersed in some kind of, Harry Potterish pink light. But I think that it can also be a very concrete thing. I am here, I have some experience, I'm willing to talk to you about these things if you are willing to talk to me back. So we have a deep conversation, and that's what this Source Magic Mentorship is. And so far it's been going really well, and it's very interesting for me also. So I think I'll just want to branch out and make myself available.
That's really cool. Something I had wanted to ask you before. First off, before I even ask you about the other thing, I did want to kind of make a comment about something. I guess it was kind of like what Liza and you were talking about, with ritual work. I do think at the beginning it was very good for me to, after I had magical experiences, I had noticed that there was a lot of associations and a lot of things I would use and put into my ritual that I was like, oh, this all makes sense now to me. So I do think it helped me make more sense of my experiences. But one thing that I always thought was weird, and what I thought is a problem, and it was kind of what Liza was getting into, like almost being put in a box. This is just my experience. I don't know how it was for you when you were in the OTO. But when I was in the OTO, whenever they did rituals, they did Aleister Crowley's stuff word for word. And I was like, yo, where are you in this? Where's your passion? Where's your thoughts and feelings? This is just, you're just copying this guy's stuff, and that's it. Just to me, I was just like, I couldn't do that. There were certain things I had to rewrite myself, because like, this is me, not him. Like, and I just felt like there was like, you kind of almost, sometimes with these rituals, I just think sometimes people do kind of put themselves in a box and they don't really express themselves as much. To an extent. Sometimes I thought that could be a problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hear you. And I mean, to a certain degree, I've had the same kind of experiences, but I felt in that particular group and structure, I wanted to go through it like college in a way. I wanted to finish and get my degree. You
got a bunch of them.
Beautiful, because I've always admired Crowley a lot. So he was definitely a great magician and a great synthesizer of energies coming from the East and the West and all kinds of places. He had its faults, and I think they are inherited in a way by the organizations that exist, in that he was brought up in a fundamentalist Christian home, right? And then he rebelled and called himself the Great Beast. He had mommy issues, but then eventually he overachieved for mommy by again becoming the prophet of a new religion. So I think he was too imbued with that kind of religious upbringing. But the philosophy of Thelema and also the magic, I think, is very, very healthy. But that comes not from him as some kind of, originator. It comes from Nietzsche, comes from Schopenhauer, a lot of German philosophy of will. And I think that aspect of encouraging young people to find their own true, genuine will, that is where the magic lies. And then what kind of rituals you do or go through in order to learn, that's completely secondary, I'd say, because people who have found their true wills, they are, for me, inherently magical, whether they work with magic or not, because there's just some kind of, next level mind frame when you are completely who you should be. You are working with exactly what you should work with. And you feel it, you know it, your intuition has brought you to that place. And I don't think that any particular magic can take you there. It's an all immersive process. And if there's any tool out of the toolbox presented by Crowley, for instance, I would say that yoga and meditation are much more conducive to that kind of success than the Western ceremonial system, which I feel is way too symbolized. There's way too many symbols in that toolbox. Cracking those nuts in that toolbox doesn't make you a magician. However, if you work with yoga and meditation, you will be so centered, and that will be so conducive to your own insights about who you are, what you want to do, how you want to go about it. I think it's much, much healthier, actually.
Yeah,
and I think that there's a problem when there are strong leaders, strong leaders like Crowley, when they disappear, create a vacuum. That can happen easily. And I think then it's sort of everything's up for grabs. And the people who have the best, the biggest muscles in a way, perhaps, take over and then try to define what it is that was. And I think it's better if people can find, they should find their own way through these sort of precursors, but it should not become, quite simply, I don't think these magical things should become religions. And that's the problem with Crowley when he called himself a prophet, and it's the book of the law, and no one else had the right to interpret it. And to me, that sounds like any kind of bullshit from any of the existing religions that they've been shoving down people's throats for thousands of years. And that hasn't really worked out so well. And I think that the core of every religion is essentially good. And they're all basically saying the same thing. If you ask them, it's a religion of love and peace, listen to, respect your neighbor and all these things. But I would prefer to see more of that and see that there is some kind of universal strain in, let's call it kind of a spiritual presence in the human mind. I don't know if that's biological or cultural, but it seems to be existing in all cultures, this desire to go beyond and be magical and trust intuition. And unfortunately, I think it's a matter of human group dynamics. Someone sees an opportunity, grabs it and says, I have the answer, listen to me. And then it becomes a business. For good or bad. It's just the way human nature seems to be working. So in that sense, it's good when the rebels come and shake things up a bit, because at least the system won't become inert and die, but it can improve. It can always improve. And I think that's the case with Crowley and Crowley's organizations, is true for the bigger religions, is true for very small occult organizations also. You have to keep that group dynamic in check. And I think one way of doing that is to have the signal, what's contained, the philosophy or the magical system, keep it as pure as possible, so that there's no wiggle room for, hostile mergers or hostile takeovers.
One other...
When you mentioned how,
Go. Sorry, no, go, Lisa.
About Western occultism, I'm just going to insert this comment, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I just wanted to ask. When you mentioned Western occultism, and then you mentioned how you would probably get more out of yoga and meditation, is it true that Western occultism has its roots in Sufism and most of the Eastern traditions? So it would be kind of like going back to the basics, so to speak.
Mm.
Would that be an accurate way to say that?
Yeah, no, it's accurate, but when you go further back, it becomes it's such a big hotbed of stuff. And to simplify things, it's like the Mediterranean region many thousand years ago, contained so much traffic, not only commerce and warfare, but also culture, philosophy, science, early science, and of course the magical sciences. And it was kind of a stepping stone for all of these things to move to the next level of civilization, like where many of the magical things, astrology became astronomy, alchemy became chemistry, all these things. It's like things were moving on based in this region. And, eventually was crystallized what you call the Hermetic system, which was basically coming from Egypt, but coming via Greece and the philosophy there, and also then slightly, Asia Minor stuff coming in from the actual East via the Levantine region. And it's just like really a hotbed of things going back and forth. And then, slightly later, there was also commerce and trade, also in magic with the Knights Templar. It's never ended, this kind of movements of energies and philosophies and stuff like that. So I don't think you can say that the Western ceremonial system is all coming from the East specifically. It comes from this fairly open-minded trafficking of various proto-sciences and philosophies. What makes it the Western esoteric system, though, is the specifically Western tendency to overthink, to overstructure, to be so rational that it creates a system that almost like screams or cries out to be broken down or transcended. And I think maybe that's something that is indicative of all cultures, that it creates the magical system that it needs to transcend. It may sound paradoxical in a way, but I can't see why then, because parallel to the development of the Western magical system, there's also the non-magical stuff of science, of philosophy, of political science, and it's all the same. It's all hyper rational. It's all hyper systematic. It's not based in feeling or necessarily artistic creation or what you can call that the humanities. The emergence of Western civilization comes from rational thinking, from cogitation, and from being able to structure things. And of course, the force of violence also, when we talk about imperialism and how a fairly small nation like the UK, like England basically, could master such a great portion of the world was through scheming and imposing rational systems where there were no real similar systems. And then with a bit of violence, you could control all of India. It's pretty remarkable, and chunks of Africa and other Western countries could do the same. So it's that goes to show how powerful systems can be. But at the same time, it also led to the industrialization and the very negative aspects of imperialism, just leaving a trail of violence and pollution and sexual frustration and this really bad morals. For very unhealthy culture. And then of course you had the Enlightenment at the end of the 18th century, coming up with slightly more humane ideals in a way, but it's just that's just another system, because what happened then, well, there was a revolution and they chopped people's heads off. That's not so humane. Even though their ideals might have been humane, it's still the same old story. So I think what I'm trying to say is that we are all affecting and influencing each other all the time. Now it doesn't seem to be so much in a philosophical sense. Now it's more like nanochips and technology that's hard currency and going back and forth, and who owns the quantum computer that this particular AI is on, you know. But it seems that you should know that, like in the scientific communities, that there is certainly interest, you know, in new ideas going back and forth, and information to some degree is shared, even though it might be patented, it can be shared. And I think it's the same thing that was going on around the Mediterranean area. You know, people come there and they are very, very, you know, like to the Library of Alexandria, and they meet people and they compare their experiences, and that can lead to, again, interesting third mind transcendences and creations of new systems, new sciences, new arts. It's just part of human existence also. So I think that whatever we call Western esotericism today is, of course, you know, needs to be somehow rooted in the Western cultural sphere, meaning, you know, Europe and the US. But at the same time, there's an origin story for everything, you know, and where that comes from. That's probably what the academics are working with now, trying to discern where all of these elements come from. And I think it will, if it hasn't shown already, it will show that everything comes from somewhere. And then again, when you look at that, that will have come from somewhere else there also. You know, yes. It's just a constant migration of ideas.
Yep. Yes. One other question I did have, and, you know, and then maybe after that we'll wrap it up. You had mentioned before a culture a few times. Now I know there's a conference called a culture. Have you ever spoke there?
Yeah. Yes.
What, like, I know. What's your feeling on those? Like, to be totally honest with you, me and Lisa have thrown around the idea, and hopefully maybe 2 years actually trying to do a conference for the Occult Rejects and have everybody on the Occult Rejects go somewhere and speak and stuff. But what's your, like, how, like, do you enjoy doing that? Do you feel like, you know, like you're like hands on with people and you get more out of that? Like, I just want your opinion on, like, when you do conferences and stuff.
Yeah, no, I love it, and that's a big reason, sort of a big difference there. As opposed to the academic conferences, because you mentioned the Occult conference that's basically taking place in Europe, based in Berlin, and we spoke there 2 years ago, and it was so funny also because, you know, they call it the Occult conference, and I spoke about my time in the Temple of Psychic Youth, and Genesis Bjorge was the person, the magician, who coined the term occulture, and I actually printed myself a little fanzine we had in Topi called Occulture in 1990. So that was kind of a revelation for them. Some may have known it, but they even acknowledged that during the conference that, wow, now we hear about the origin of the actual word itself when I was talking about that. So I felt very welcome there. I love those people. They're working really hard at creating a community and a great sort of gesamt experience where there's, you know, book stalls and lectures and film showings and art performances and, you know, all kinds of stuff that can fit under this very eclectic umbrella in a way. And now they're only doing the conference every other year, but this year I think they were in Italy and having kind of a retreat instead, or a conference in a different spot. And I think it's going to be again in Berlin next year. So yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there are some other things too going on. There's one called, well, it's a little bit more specific, like the Esoteric Book Conference in Seattle, I think, or in Washington State. And I'm sure there are others also. And then usually there are smaller ones for, you know, people specifically interested in witchcraft or Wicca or even Satanism and that kind of thing. But it's fun when it becomes more inviting for people from different groups and different communities. That's where the real magic happens, when there are meetings and transcendental experiences that comes from communicating.
Yeah, no, that's what I had figured. I thought you might have said that was like kind of a fulfilling experience. Because I do think it would be cool. And then I think like sometimes, just for me, I think like maybe sometimes like depending on who you're with, maybe you can express certain things that maybe you wouldn't have done with other people or on your, like for me on my podcast, it might be easier for me to kind of go deeper into things one-on-one with somebody than trying to express it on my show, where everybody be like, "What? I don't even know what this guy's talking about." You know, I don't know. I just did think that that's probably it's something I am heavily into entertaining. You know, I think it would be very helpful and impactful. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, I just wondered, you know, because when you mentioned a culture a few times, I was like, I wonder if he's talking about like the conference also, or if he's, you know, has that in mind when he's saying that. That's pretty cool that you've spoke that.
No, I mean, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. It wasn't that I expected something bad or anything, but it was so well put together. And that just goes to show how things develop over time if the soil is good. You know, the soil needs nurture, the soil needs sunshine and water, and then you can, you know, pop some good seed in there and it'll become beautiful flowers. And I think in a way, I have been around the block, or been around for such a long time, that what we did back in the 80s with Topi, for instance, the Temple of Psychic Youth, and the emergence of the concept of occulture, was to affect change in the outer via culture, not necessarily by rituals, you know, invoking this and sending magical energy, but to actually produce printed matter, produce music, produce concerts, produce films, carrying that spirit of encouragement for young people to self-empower. And I think maybe the Occulture Conference is in a way a little bit of a result of that determined, diligent work that me, but also other people have done. You know, not specifically to manifest that specific thing, but in general, just carrying the spirit forward. And that, again, is what I'm thinking about now, is that how, when you have this, how do you disseminate it? And I think to have that Occulture Conference is a beautiful way of disseminating a lot of different things, yet under the same umbrella. Yes. That for me was like, very, very positive experience. And I hope to see more of that. And also hope to be invited to more academic conferences, because I think they can also see that it is very, very fertile, or, you know, cross-fertile, to invite people who are not necessarily, you know, on a program or a graduates or PhD or even professors, but simply to allow for an influx of new seed, of new blood, of new spirits in a way, because it can vitalize something that could otherwise become actually quite cultic. You know, I wrote quite jokingly somewhere that the study of Western esotericism within academia is essentially a cult. You know, because they only talk to themselves, they only produce work for themselves, and they are only referencing themselves, you know, in these endless regurgitations of footnotes in a way. But so I think they really need to welcome, for instance, magical practitioners occasionally to talk about their work, because otherwise they miss out on first-hand knowledge.
You know, I was thinking that just now. I was like, I think if the academic and occult community actually, like, people put their credentials to the side and actually just had conversations, you know, and thought other people were worthy of listening to because they didn't do what they did, you'd actually make some pretty damn good advances.
yeah, absolutely. Because it was so remarkable also now that I was at this conference in Copenhagen, is that so many of the academics, they're only talking about dead people, right? They're talking about past things in the past. So there's only essentially secondhand information, you know, books about them, interviews with them, remaining, whatever. But there's so much going on in the magical communities today that if I were a strict academic, I would be overjoyed and I would jump headfirst into catching the first-hand information.
Because, like, I would say, like, you know, depending, like, you know, the academic community could be looking at it like in a very statistical sense, and then the occultist is like, well, I may not know all that, but I have the experience. You know what I'm saying? And you put two together, I just think you can really make magic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Quite literally. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I do actually have hopes of that happening. I do think that slowly might be getting there. You know, I'm hoping.
Well, I mean, just conferences in general. I mean, I love conferences. One, because you get to leave the lab finally. And two, you travel to a different location. So you're now in a new backdrop, right? But the other thing is that you finally get to hear what other people are doing somewhere else. And not only sitting there listening to their ideas of how they went about it or their methodology or whatever, but you can somehow maybe apply it to yourself, that maybe you weren't thinking of it in that sense, but now something that they said may not even have anything to do with what you're doing will spark an idea of like, oh, I never thought of looking at my project like that. Maybe when I go back, I will incorporate that variable. But the other thing also is meeting people and getting the opportunity to make collaborative efforts to where it could also present itself as a job. It can present itself as whatever, but maybe somewhere along your research or whatever, you're thinking of something, you made a connection at a conference last year. You're like, you know what, I'm going to email that person because I think there's something they said and they can help me with something. And then the collaborative effort, like what you said at the beginning of the podcast, how like you can interact with people at face to face. You know, it's no longer you're looking at them in a lecture or you're reading their book or listening or reading their publication, but you're interacting with them face to face and listening between the lines with that type of interaction in a conference. So
yeah, no, it's a beautiful thing. It's really when humans are at their best, I think, coming up with new things together.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. All right, yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it up too. I really I had a great talk, Carl. I thought we talked about a lot of good things, and I would love to have you back on again in the future. Of course, you're always welcome on.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd be happy to.
All right, awesome. Real quick, Lisa, just let everybody know what your deal is again. They can contact you if they like.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter, Lisa, and check us out on occultresearchinstitute.org.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And Carl, real quick, let everybody know where they can find you and plug anything you want people to know about, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the plug would be for the book, since it's so fresh, Meetings with Remarkable Magicians, Life in the Occult Underground, which is basically my memoir of my life, magical life so far. I think people will find it interesting. And the best place to find me is very, very simple. It's just carlabrahamsson.com. Carl with a C, Abrahamsson with 2 S's.com. And from there, it's a rabbit hole or a wormhole to many different things and many different sites. But that's the best place to begin.
Awesome. I love it. And again, thank you so much, Carl. That was a great talk. I thought, we talked about a lot of really good points, and I hope, people got something out of that for sure. And again, would love to have, of course. But yeah, that is the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.